Good evening, everybody. It is indeed a great pleasure to welcome you once again to this August gathering. I hope all of you all are safe. Please be at home and be safe. Uh, Today, I have a person before me who had paraphrased the biblical version. The day of death is better than the day of birth. Two, the day of retirement is better than the day of swearing in as a judge. He was a person who stood his ground fearlessly and had convicted and sentenced our former chief minister and her associate, declined to grant relief to the chief minister, Mr. B.S. Yediyurappa, in land denotification cases, granted relief to IPS officer Hemant Nimbalkari in the IMA Ponzi case, and who also granted relief to KPCC President D.K. Shivakumar in cases registered by the Income Tax Department for evasion of tax. All this you know. Then you do not know the happenings, I suppose, in the year 2004, when he was a district judge, I suppose, at Hubli, when due to his rejection of the quash petition filed by the then Chief Minister of Madhya Pradesh, Mrs. Uma Bharati, was declined, she was forced to resign and surrender before the court. Yes, we have here with us Honorable Mr. Justice John Michael Kunha to speak about the latest amendment to the Prevention of Corruption Act 1998. On to Mr. J. Ravindran to invite our chief guest.
Good evening, everybody. It's indeed a great pleasure and honor to welcome you all on this evening to this topic, amendments to the Prevention of Corruption Act, where it's an interactive session where we have the right person to address Honorable Mr. Justice Michael Kunha, a well-known name. He needs no introduction in Tamil Nadu. Sir, I really thank you, sir. When I approached you, you readily accepted my invitation, sir. Please enlighten us, sir, on the subjects. Please, sir. I extend a warm welcome to you.
Sir, yes.
Yes. So good evening to you all. So thank you, Mr. Ravindran. Thank you, Sneha. I think straight away we can go to the subject.
Yes, sir.
I think as we are interacting on the amendments to the Prevention of Corruption Act 1998, I think to facilitate the interactions, it will be better if I briefly explain to you the background events leading to the amendment, especially the amendment of 2018. I think to begin with, bribery and corruption by public servants is not a new phenomenon. You just open the Indian Penal Code 1860, you will find section 161 to 165A in chapter 9 of the code dealing with the offences relating to the public servant. Of course, these sections are now repealed by the PC Act of 1988. But what does it indicate is that these offences were made punishable as back as in or ever since 1860. And these offences included the acceptance of the bribe and the criminal misconduct by the public servants. What happened is that after the World War II, the scope of bribery and corruption of public servants was enormously increased, and because of the war conditions, large amount of government stores had to be disposed of, large amount of money had to be dispersed for post-war reconstructions, new contracts had to be entered into. So all this gave a scope for the corrupt practices by the public servants, and to stamp out this evil, or we can say to have a control over the public servants, an independent or an act was enacted in 1947. What we know as a Prevention of Corruption Act of 1947. This act was enacted to supplement the provisions which were already there in the IPC, that is section 161 to 165A. But by this act, the offences were made cognizable, especially the offence under section 165. It was made cognizable. A presumption was carved out, and it was said that in a trial for the offences under the provisions of the 1947 Act, it would be presumed. See, it is not that presumption is not a new one. In 1947 itself, there was a presumption. It said it would be presumed that if a public servant accepts the bribe, it will be presumed that he received it or obtained it for performing or for doing an official act or an official favor. In this act, you would see that the public servant was, the definition of a public servant as per section 21 was adopted. There were specific offences of the offences what we have in section 7 and section 13. And even in this act, you could see that there were officers of the senior grade were required to investigate into the offences. See, all this, and even presumption also was the presumption what we have, or rather what we call that is the other safeguards also were provided. That is, a court cannot take cognizance without the previous sanction. All these provisions were there, and in the 1947 Act, and over the years there were 2 amendments to this Act in 1952 and 1964. But the drastic amendments, we can say, or the large-scale amendments were introduced to this 1947 Act in the year 1988. See, this 1988, what is the act what we are having today, is it consolidated and amended all the earlier provisions, and it made it as a comprehensive act, we can say. The very definition of the public servant, earlier it was section 21, now the very definition of the public servant was widened. It took almost every person, one was dealing with the public office as a within the fold of under the net of the Prevention of Corruption Act, and it also made an independent adjudicating body. That is, a special judge was constituted under the Act to deal exclusively with the offences under the PC Act of 1988. This court was invested with the powers of the original. It was invested with the original jurisdiction of a magistrate, of a district judge, of a session judge. So these are the changes that were, and to safeguard the interest of the accused, even here the investigation was required to be done by an higher or the superior officer. The courts were debarred from taking cognizance of the offences without the prior sanction of the competent authority. See, all these provisions were there, and the act was working. I think it was working fine. And this act, as you know, especially dealt with 2 types of offences. That is, offence of receiving or accepting the bribe, as well as offence of criminal misconduct. But in 2013, a proposal was made to amend this Act of 1988, and the statement of objects and the reasons given for the proposal to amend were, as the India was the signatory to the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, UNCSC, it has to adopt to its domestic laws had to be brought in line with the international practices. So that was one of the reasons for proposal of the amendment. And it is the second reason was assigned is that there were various judicial pronouncement, and because of this judicial pronouncement, there was some gap in the description of the offences and the protection given to the accused. So with these intentions or objects, amendment was proposed. Now a bill was passed, not passed. It was the bill was referred to the was moved in the Rajya Sabha. Now the Rajya Sabha referred it to the department related to the Standing Committee on Personnel and Public Grievances, which presented its views by way of report. Law Commission also submitted its report, what you call is 254th report. The matter was again sent to Select Committee, and this Select Committee took the views of all the stakeholders, included the CBI, and finally we have the amendments of 2018. I think today we will be mainly concentrating or dealing with these amendments. I think drastic amendments have been brought to the Prevention of Corruption Act 1988. Only thing is the amendments, the amplitude of these amendments is such, I think we can only say that we are fortunate enough that the act is not repealed. Otherwise, I think almost all the substantive or the substantial provisions of the act have been amended. And what we see in this amendment is that some of the provisions are amended, some provisions are inserted, some provisions are substituted. Now let us take one by one the amendments that have been brought into this act. I think if you are having the act with you, you just take section 17A and section 18A. See, these are the two provisions which have been inserted. So that means for the first time, we are having a new provisions by way of section 17A. Why I am delving into it, I think it has given rise to many misgivings or apprehension, and there's a general feeling, maybe in the advocate circle or in the judicial fraternity, that an effort has been made by bringing in these provisions, by inserting these provisions, an effort has been made to protect, or rather overprotect, the public servants, or the provision, this provision has been inserted to hijack the investigation itself or to dilute the entire investigation process. See what the, but on reading of this section 17A, which has been introduced by way of amendment by insertion, I don't find there is any justifiable reason for such misgivings or such apprehension. Why? I'll just explain to you. Just see what has been inserted or brought into this act. Section 17A. No police officer shall conduct any enquiry. See the word enquiry, EN. Enquiry or inquiry, IN. Or investigation into any offence alleged to have been committed by a public servant under this act, where the alleged offence is relatable to any recommendation made or decision taken by such public servant in discharge of his official function or duties without the previous approval of the central government or the state government or by the competent authority. See, it is not a blanket provision. You must read it carefully. What it says is that a police officer cannot inquire, cannot investigate in respect of what? When the offense alleged is relatable to a recommendation made or decision taken by the public servant. Not all and every offense, it does not say. It qualifies and says police officer is debarred from inquiring into or investigating into the offense under this act which are relatable to the decision taken or recommendation made by the public servant. If you see the offences under this act, that is, offences are defined in section 7 to section 16, we can say. These offences deal with the offence section 7 mainly. offense by the public servant, they deal with the offense of taking bribe. No decision is involved. No recommendation is involved. Other offense by the public servant is a criminal misconduct under section 13. That is, what the section says is that criminal misappropriation. Next is amassing the property disproportionate to his asset. So no decision is involved. So as such, that cannot be, according to me, that there is no basis or justification for such misgivings, saying that by introducing this provision, that a blanket protection has been given to the public servants who are accused of committing the offense under this act. But you should also know that even assuming that there is such a restriction or such an embargo, would it stand in the eye of law? I think this position is very much clear. If you just see, a similar situation arose in Subramaniam Swamy versus the Director CBI 2014 8 SEC 682, wherein the constitutional validity of section 6A of the Delhi Special Police Establishment Act 1946 was challenged. See, this provision was inserted with effect from 12/9/2003. See, same position as we have got here, which provided for obtaining prior approval of the central government for conducting of any inquiry or investigation, same wordings as we have got here, for any offense alleged to have been committed under the PC Act, where allegations relate to the officers of the level of Joint Secretary and above. So a discrimination or distinction was made that when the allegations pertain to the Joint Secretary and above, then you cannot conduct any investigation without the prior approval of the central government. And this was challenged before the Honorable Supreme Court. And what the court says in Para 91, and it is better that I read to you so as to allay all the apprehension regarding the application of this provision, section 17A. In Para 91, it says, in so far as investigation is concerned, an investigation into a crime may have some adverse impact, but where there are allegations of an offense under the PC Act 1988 against a public servant, whether high or low, whether decision maker or not. See, we have got a same words. An independent investigation into such an allegation is of utmost importance, and unearthing the truth is the goal. The aim and object of investigation is ultimately to search for truth. The further words are important, and any law that impedes that object may not stand the test of Article 14. Now, an embargo has been created, or a requirement has been laid down under this act, stating that all such offences have to be investigated cannot be investigated without the prior approval. Will it stand? See, the test is, what is the object you want to achieve? Has it got this restriction? Has it got a nexus with the objects sought to be achieved? I think certainly if this principle is followed, I think ultimately, I think it has already been challenged and the matter is pending before the Honorable Supreme Court. I think it is very difficult to sustain such a thing. But I think I have to clarify here that the words that has been used in this section, see, the investigating officer cannot investigate, cannot inquire. What do you mean by that? Whether investigating authority has got any, investigating officer has got any power to inquire? You see the definition of inquiry in section 2G of the Act. How does it define? Section 2G of the Act. Inquiry means every inquiry other than a trial conducted under this code by a magistrate or court. Inquiry can be conducted only by the court. Inquiry is a stage before the trial commences. all the proceedings that the court takes before framing the charge. Trial commences when the charge is framed. Before that, the proceedings that are conducted by the magistrate, we call that is inquiry. Investigation officer has got no power to inquire at all. And the other type of inquiry we have under section 200, a private complaint is filed. If the magistrate wants to take action under 202, he can inquire into. So inquiry is the domain of the court, the magistrate, not of the investigating officer. So this expression, we just fail to understand how it came into it. Inquiry means what? Inquiry means just a question. It has got no legal significance as such. Inquire. We inquire inquire the details about the facts with the accused or with the witnesses. That is, we make it during the inquiry. It has got no much significance. I think if at all it has got some significance regarding inquiry, I think that we can see in Lalita Kumari's case. In Lalita Kumari, the constitutional bench decision, which has laid down a law that when an FIR, when an information is given to the police regarding the commission of a cognizable offense, the investigating officer or the police have no other option than to register the FIR. But this decision says there are 5 types of situations where before registering the FIR, you can inquire into, or you can make a preliminary inquiry. So that may be at the most what has been said. It says that if there are matrimonial allegations of matrimonial offenses or allegations of corruption, allegations of medical negligence, or if there is a delay and all other things, in these 5 types of cases only, the police officers can make a preliminary investigation. So if at all they can make an investigation or preliminary inquiry in relation to these 5 types of cases, but to say that without approval you can't investigate at all, I think that is overreaching the law and runs counter to the law laid down by the Honorable Supreme Court in Dr. Subramanian's case. I think that is the one aspect which you have to remember while considering the effect of this insertion of section 17A. Now the other section that has been inserted is section 18A. Section 18A. This is the provisions of a Criminal Law Amendment Ordinance 1944 to apply to attachment under this act. I think this is a good provision we can say. See, this is an effective machinery, that is, or an effective procedure, we can say, a remedy that is available to the investigating officer to run after the proceeds of the crime. If an accused has amassed some wealth, or he is found to be in possession of the money or the properties which he has acquired out of the commission of the offense under this act, then there is a general provision, as you know, under section 102. The investigating officer can seize this property, and of course a seizure order also has gotten legal effect like that of an attachment. But a more effective remedy was provided under the Criminal Law Amendment Ordinance of 1944. It's a pre-independence act. You may be knowing it. After the Independence Act, all the pre-independence legislations they get repealed unless they have been ratified. Now this pre-independence legislation is incorporated in this in the PC Act by a procedure, what we call it, this legislation by incorporation. Even in the earlier provisions, if you see section 5 of the earlier act, what it said was that a special judge, 5(6), clause 6, a special judge, while trying an offense punishable under this act, shall exercise all the powers and functions exercisable by a district judge under the Criminal Law Amendment Ordinance Act. Now, here by this section 18A, what has been said is that he can, save as otherwise provided under the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, they shall apply to the attachment, administration of attachment property, and execution of an order of attachment of property procured by means of an offense under this act. See, under the Criminal Law Amendment Act, an effective remedy is provided. It is a mixture of the civil remedy as well as civil procedure as well as a criminal procedure. This attachment takes place before the court takes cognizance of the offense. Therefore, the criminal law amendment ordinance is provided when the government is made known that the accused is in possession, is dealing with some property which is procured by the commission of an offense, then it can authorize the investigating officer to move the district judge. Not that, because at that time the court is not in picture, to the district judge, and the procedure to be followed is Order 27 or Order 21, Rule 54. All this procedure has to be followed, and the district judge has to pass an interim order of attachment immediately on filing the application on the basis of the affidavit. Then the notice or the persons interested has to file an objection. That objection has to be inquired into, and thereafter the district judge can make the attachment order absolute, or he can release the property. And this attachment will stand till the culmination of the trial by the criminal court. Once the criminal court takes cognizance, all the powers of attachment comes to the district judge. And thereafter this attachment has to be dealt with as per the orders of the criminal court. That is the procedure. And here that has been ratified, and that is the procedure which has been made applicable to an offense or to an investigation under the provisions of this act. So these are the two provisions which have been added or inserted new provisions under the act. Now coming to the most important part of our discussion, that is the main offense and the penalties or the substantive provisions of the act. See, under the existing act, what we mean is that the Prevention of Corruption Act, because this entire act is not repealed under the act. See, what was if you go through this entire provisions, see the offenses and the penalties are dealt in chapter 3. Yes, chapter 3. That is from section 7 to section 16. And if you go through this provisions, that section 7, section 10, and section 13 deal with the offenses by the public servant. You see that section 7, any public servant who does, section 7, section 10, any public servant. But the other offenses 8 and 9, these could be committed by the non-public servant, by a private individual. You see that section 8 in the old act. I'm taking the old act, that is prior to the amendment. Section 7, see section 8, whoever accepts, section 9, section 8, whoever accepts, not the public servant. So these are the old provision or the old act included the offenses committed by the public servant as well as the offenses committed by the private servant. But the person who gives the bribe, as per section 24, he could not have been prosecuted. That was the position before the amendment. And the offenses under this act, as you could see, are mainly the offenses defined under section 7 and section 13. What are the offenses defined under section 17, section 7? These are nothing but the acceptance, whoever being or expecting to be a public servant accepts or obtains or agrees to obtain from any person for himself or any other person gratification other than the legal remuneration as a motive or reward for doing an official act. So section 7 is nothing but acceptance, demand and acceptance of illegal gratification to do an official act. Section 8, if you see that, where a private person, he accepts illegal gratification to induce a public servant to do or not to do an official act. They are the public servant under section 7. Here, private person. For example, I think recently you might have been hearing about a retired judge who approaches a private person and gives him a lot of money in crores, asking him to secure the post of governor. See here, I think this offense comes under where private person accepts illegal gratification to induce a public servant. So induce the public servant, those who are in a position to procure the governor's post to this person. So the offense is by a private person which has got a implication or which is intended, which affects the administration of justice. So that is section 8. And section 9 under the old act. A private person receives illegal gratification to exercise his personal influence over a public servant. Now this person, one who receives the money, let us say he appears to be a Swami. Certainly he has got, as per our present situation, he is in a position to exercise influence over the public servant. It falls under section 9. So what has been accepted, see, that was the position. And section 10, a public servant abets the commission of these offences by the private person. That is under section 8 or 9. Then the public servant renders himself liable for abatement of the offence under section 10. So that offence can be committed only by the public servant. Section 11, the public servant himself obtains valuable thing in which, while dealing with the business transaction. I think that is very common. For example, he has invited a tender. Now, by favoring a person while allotting the tender, I think this is that such an offence falls under section 11. Then section 13 deals with the criminal misconduct. Criminal misconduct, it had 4 subclauses, because here itself we have to. First is if he habitually accepts the bribe as contemplated under section 7, or B, subclause B, if he habitually accepts the bribe in connection with the business transaction or in business with the business transaction which is carrying on, that is as defined under section 11. Then C, if fraudulently or dishonestly misappropriates the property which has been entrusted to his care, then misappropriation is a criminal misconduct which has been defined under C. And under D is a very important, because here itself we should remember, see, one specific misconduct which was provided under the earlier act or before amendment under 1D, and most of the cases were filed under this act, where the public servant misuses or abuses his office to make unlawful gain, either for himself or to get illegal gratification for himself or for any other purpose. That was covered under section D. These were the misconducts or the criminal misconduct which were made punishable under this act, and the other provisions were there, which is the habitually committing offences for regarding the punishment which may not be very material. So this was the position before the amendment. Now you just see what changes have come about to this act. That is section 7(8), that's by way of the amendment. Now in this amendment of 2018, you just see here, because this is very important as I think in our day-to-day function as an advocate. See, section 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 are substituted. Section 13 is amended. That's why I said what is the this amendment has created, given rise to all this discussion is because of this. The mode that is avoided, that has been adopted to bring about the amendments. So section 7, I said section 7, 8, 9, these are the penal provisions, substantive provisions. These are substituted. Now, what is the legal effect of a substitution? An amendment by substitution. I think all of you may be knowing an amendment which has the effect of substituting, the substitution of a provision has the effect of replacing the old provision by the substituted provision. So it replaces the old provision with the new provision. So the new provision, what you bring in, it is replaced or it is entered in the statute book right from the inception, from ab initio. It goes to the date when it is, because the earlier provisions are substituted, have the effect of repeal. Substitution results in repeal of the earlier provisions, and its replacement by the new provisions. I think the case law, if you want, Zail Singh versus State of Haryana, 2014, 8 SEC 1. Now, if this is the legal effect, naturally, now even when the old provisions in which, under which the action was initiated against the accused, they thought that this is a boon for us because old provisions are repealed. They are not there in the statute books. New provisions, if they do not make out an offense, especially if you see that section 13(1)(d) is not that it disappeared now. It is not an offense. If a person abuses his position, it is not an offense at all now. We'll just come to it and deal with the section 13 that has been amended. Section 13. So most of the cases were filed against the accused under section 13(1)(d). So they filed an application or sought for quashing the proceedings, saying that the old law is repealed. There is in the new law, there is no provision for which I have prosecuted, so therefore acquit me. So here you should know that even though applications would be filed, and I think it will give sometimes a breathing time or the dilatory tactics for the accused, as generally that is the only way the accused try to prolong the litigation. But there is another equally important principle you should know, as laid down in Nani Gopal Mitra versus State of Bihar, year 1970, Supreme Court, 1636. 1636. So what is it says is, as a general rule, the amended law relating to procedure operate retrospectively, but there is another equally important principle, namely that a statute should not be so construed as to create new disabilities or obligations or impose new duties in respect of transactions which were complete at the time of amending act came into force. The same principle is embodied in section 6 of the General Clauses Act, which is to be followed. So repeal of the act, what is the effect of a pending proceedings has been dealt with in section 6. So that is applicable, and it says the effect of the application of this principle is that pending cases, although instituted under the old act, but still pending, are covered by the new procedure under the amended law. So procedure, yes, but whatever procedure was correctly adopted and concluded under the old law cannot be opened again for the purpose of applying the new procedure. So this you should keep in mind when you press or assure the or move in applications to the to quash the proceedings or seek acquittal of the accused. See, the first principle you should remember, I think that has been very well explained or laid down in AR 1975 SC 540. I think if you remember these principles, then the legal effect of these insertions or these amendments by way of substitution will come to know. So what is the Honorable Supreme Court has said? The golden rule of construction is that in the absence of anything in the enactment to show that it is to have retrospective operation, it cannot be construed to have the effect of altering the law applicable to be a claim in litigation at the time when the act was passed. Is there anything in sections in this amending act of 2018 to show that these substantive provisions were intended to be retrospective? There is absolutely nothing indicating, nothing to show that the legislature intended that this provision should be applicable retrospectively even to the pending proceedings. I think therefore, I think when the matter has come before the various high courts, I think high courts have taken consistent view about this position. So that is one aspect you should remember about it. So now let us come to the section 7. What is the changes that have been brought by way of this amendment? See section 7, because yes, section 7, offences relating to public servants being bribed. See the wordings. Offences relating to public servant being bribed. It is not that they accept bribe. The body of the section says that it is just like the mother feeding the child. It is not that child drinking the milk. So it is wordings is like that because our public servants are so innocent. That is, unless somebody has to bribe them. But the offense is any public servant who obtains or accepts or attempts to obtain from any person an undue advantage with the intention to perform or cause performance of public duty improperly or dishonestly, or to forbear or cause forbearance to perform such duty by himself or by any other public servant, or obtains as a reward or whatever it may be. See, if you read this entire provision carefully, there is nothing, no change in substance regarding the ingredients of the offense, except some change of the wordings or the change of expressions. The change of expressions are, instead of in the earlier provisions in section 7, when the public servant receives or obtains an illegal gratification to do an official act. That is the gist of the offense under section 7. Now that is replaced with the expression where he receives, accepts or obtains an undue advantage to perform a public duty. These are the only changes. And what is an undue advantage? Undue advantage has been defined. Undue advantage, you just see the definition. Undue advantage D. 2D. Undue advantage means any gratification, whatever other than the legal remuneration. So same earlier, what was explained by what was there in the main section, now they have included by way of explanation. That's all. So that is the only, otherwise there is no much change in section 7. Only thing is that now the burden to prove is that he has taken an undue advantage. Undue advantage has been expressed. It is nothing but as it is equivalent at par with the gratification, illegal gratification. Then it is a public duty. It should be connected with the public duty. I think that expression also is defined, means a duty in the discharge of which the state or the public or community at large has an interest. I think wide or expansive definition. Maybe this expression has been used to bring it to conformity with the international standard. That is what we said. The convention to which the India had agreed, convention against I think because of that, I think this expression has been used. And even otherwise, the proposal that was given for amendment of these provisions, it is nothing but an application of the Bribery Act of UK Bribery Act of 2010. Only thing is that because of later some suggestions, some alteration has been made. Otherwise, an attempt is not to give effect to the act. It is just to bring it in conformity with the international standards. So that is the section 7. I don't find there is any difference in the often. If you read the section, it is more or less the same ingredients what we find in the now section 8. That is important. That is a new section, section 7A, taking undue advantage to influence public servant by corrupt or illegal means. That is here, what was earlier section 8 and 9. I give you an example. The same two sections are now reproduced. They find place in section 7A. So what was earlier 8 and 9, you can see it in section 7A. Section 8, this is a totally new, where the bribe giver is now indicted. Earlier, yes, in section 24, we said that bribe giver, he cannot be prosecuted. This statement cannot be, but here, for the first time, and this is also again to bring it in conformity with the international standard, because he is also equally culpable. See, the bribe, corrupt and corrupter, both should be indicted. I think this is a welcome step. It is, because though it is generally felt that it discourages the persons to go and report to the authorities, but necessary safeguards are provided. What it says is that if you are made or forced to give the bribe, then you cannot be prosecuted. See, that is provided that the proviso that the provisions of this section shall not apply where a person is compelled to give such undue advantage. When you are compelled to give, when there is a demand without paying, if the public servant does not issue the certificate, you are forced to. Then, to be on the safer side, to avoid the prosecution, what he has to do? Provided further that the person so compelled shall report the matter to the law enforcement authority or investigate agency within a period of 7 days from the date of giving such advantage. So that means, to be on the safer side, to avoid prosecution, when there is a demand and acceptance, within 7 days he has to lodge a complaint. Otherwise, he is deemed to have been a complicit in the offense. He has also bribed the public servant. He renders himself liable for the prosecution under Section 8. Now, Section 9, this is also a new provision where the offense relating to the bribe is committed by a commercial organization. So, instead of an individual, the commercial organization take the benefit in connection with its business. So, that is, if you read this, it is nothing but is the place of the private individual, you substitute the commercial organization or the commercial organization. What is commercial organization also has been defined in subclause 3, and Section 10 makes the person in charge of the commercial organization vicariously liable. It is, instead of an individual, commercial organization to have some share or some benefit in the business. I think this is also a very common offense. So that has been included. And Section 11, this is same as the old Section 11, where the public servant takes the bribe in relation to the transaction that has been entered into by him. That means when he's dealing with the contract, or when he's floating a tender, accepting the tender, he shows favoritism, or he acts against the interest of the general public or against the state. So the offense comes under the same offense that has been retained. So these are the changes that have been brought about under this act. But Section 13, if you see, I think what is the purpose for which this amendment has been made, it appears to have been belied. See, criminal misconduct in the earlier provision, as earlier, it had 4 subclauses: 13(1), A, B, C, D. A and B dealt with the habitual receipt of the illegal gratification or the bribe by the public servant. If he is an habitual, that is considered or constituted as a criminal misconduct. Or if he is habitually, he has received the bribe or received illegal gratification in respect of a business transaction, then Section 13(B). Now, both these clauses are not there, but only clause C is there. Clause C, but these clauses we can see, though they are not included here, they are there in Section 11 and Section 8, Section not 8, Section 7A. So therefore, I think that has been included. Now, what has been included in criminal misconduct is a public servant is said to commit the criminal misconduct only now 2 clauses. One is, if he dishonestly or fraudulently misappropriates or otherwise converts for his own use any property entrusted to him or the property under which he has been controlled. So criminal misappropriation is considered as an criminal misconduct. And B, if he intentionally enriches himself illicitly. See, earlier the expression was that if the public servant or anyone on his behalf is found in possession of disproportionate properties or assets disproportionate to his income for which he cannot suitably explain, that was the offense. Now the main section says intentionally enriches himself. But if you see the explanation, the same wordings or the same ingredients as we had in 13(1)(e), disproportionate asset case, a person shall be presumed to have intentionally enriched if he or any person on his behalf is in possession or has at any time during that period, is the same expression, been in possession of pecuniary resources or property disproportionate to his known source of income, which the public servant cannot satisfactorily account for. I think there is no much change, but the problem is the clause D, because majority of the cases were filed under clause D, where, for example, in a case of a denotification, where by abuse of the public office, the ministers or the public figures, they dole out the state properties. It is an abuse of the process of court. That offense, which was considered as a criminal misconduct under section 13(1)D, has disappeared. If that is the case, you can imagine how many, whether by deleting or omitting that provision, how many cases will be filed. Now, regarding under section 7 for demand of the illegal gratification, there is a threat looming against the bribe giver also, because the moment he says that I have paid, immediately he will file a case stating that he bribed me, because the section 7 also says an offense bribing the public servant. So he faces that risk also. So hardly any cases would come. Then public abuse of the public use, I think that provision is not there, it has disappeared. Only criminal misconduct and the disproportionate assets or the criminal misappropriation, I think that is the effect that is should take into account while considering the scope of this amendments. I think the last one aspect what I have to deal is regarding the sanction. See, the provisions of sanction was there in 1947 Act also, because this is a safeguard. See, the two safeguards were because it is very easy, because if a person, one who is disgruntled, or if he has got some axe to grind with the public servant, he approaches the public servant does not oblige, it is very easy to lodge a complaint, false complaint against him. And once the complaint is that, you know the consequences, he will lose his job, you can arrest him to any extent, and if his superiors also join, if they want to deny the promotions, all these things would be there. So there are scope to misuse the act also to the detriment of the public servant. Therefore, safeguards were there. One safeguard was that the investigation by a superior officer. Second was the sanction. The sanction, it said that if any offense is committed under this act, the court shall not take cognizance of the offenses without the previous sanction of either the central government or the state government, if it is an employee of the state government, or the competent authority who is empowered to remove him, is appointing authority. So without that sanction, that was the law. But what is the procedure what we have to follow? See, when they have to obtain the sanction, when an FIR has been filed, then investigation is done, material is collected, then a report, final report is prepared, and before filing the final report into the court, the investigating officer is to place this material before the sanctioning authority. Sanctioning authority is to apply his mind to the facts, then he would decide whether to give sanction or not. If the sanction is given, then only the court could take cognizance. Now take a situation where the proceedings initiated not by lodging a FIR before the police, but by filing a private complaint under section 200. What the magistrate or the special courts has to do? Special court, either it can take cognizance and then proceed under section 204, or it can refer it to the police for investigation under section 156(3). Now, now the judicial precedent said, when you refer it to the police for investigation under 156, you have to apply your mind. It is as good as taking cognizance. So therefore, the law or the law laid down by the courts or the higher courts, especially in Ayyappa's case, what it said laid down is that a sanction is required even at the pre-cognizance stage, even when you refer it to the investigation. Because of the judicial test, which said that at the pre-cognizance stage also sanction is required, and even the law is as on today is that after retirement no sanction is necessary. But now I think because of these provisions, the present act says, you see the provision section 19, so previous sanction necessary. No court shall take cognizance of an offense punishable under section 7, 11, 13 and 15 without the previous sanction. This is the same provision what we had earlier. but provided that no request can be made by a person other than a police officer or an officer of an investigating agency or other law enforcement authority to the appropriate authority as the case, the sanction of such government or authority for taking cognizance by the court of any offences specified in the subsection, unless such person has filed a complaint in a competent court about the alleged offence for which the public servant is sought to be prosecuted, and the court has not dismissed the complaint. See, this is catered to the situation, as I said, if the complaint has been filed or the information has been filed before the police and a final report is filed, then at that time the court has to insist. Now, when a private complaint is filed, when the court refers the complaint for investigation, then such a private person has to obtain the sanction. That is what it says, that sanction could be applied only by the investigating officer or the police officer. If anyone other than the police officer applies, that means a private individual, then you should have filed a complaint under section 200. That complaint should not have been dismissed. It must be kept pending. That means the court, looking into the averments or allegations made therein, finds that this matter requires the investigation. Then it should direct the private person to get the sanction. Then only that person can approach the sanctioning authority, and then in such events the sanctioning authority has to take a decision within 3 months and communicate to the sanction. That is the meaning of it. And further, there is another proviso says, another explanation says, for the purpose of subsection 1, the expression public servant includes such person who had ceased to hold the office. I said that another situation, if a person one was ceased, is no more a public servant, but now the section says, even if a public servant has demitted an office, even if he is retired, this law, I said, is according to the law laid down by the Honorable Supreme Court as recent as in 2020 in B. Srinivasan and another 2022 SEC 153, where the court has, after considering all the decisions, has said the laws declared by the court, it is a settled law. Court has said that the protection under the concerned provisions would not be available to a public servant after he had demitted his office or retired from his service. Court in 2020, it says that no sanction is required if it is certain, but here this law is contrary to law. I think when it is tested, the court has to take a call, because in the face of this, of course, to get over these decisions and law has been made, whether such position is permissible has to be seen by the law. But for the present, you must note the earlier decision what I gave you, that is Nani Gopal Mitra versus State of Bihar, AR 1970 SC 1636. I think the parties cannot, because this procedure, when a right has already been crystallized and transaction is complete, then you can't reopen it based on this provision. Because of say, lack of sanction, no persons can seek for acquittal or discharge or quashing of the proceedings as the law laid down in AR 1970 SC 1636. I think this is all I want to share with you regarding the amendments. So first I explained to you the history. It is not a new offense. These offenses against the public servants were there right from 1860. That offenses took the shape of a law in 1947. They were amended from time to time, and a comprehensive act was enacted in 1988. That act was working fine. It widened the definition of the public servant. It defined the offences, and these offences included the receipt of the bribe, abuse of the office, the criminal misconduct. But thereafter, we are having now the present situation where a protection, not only a protection, a double protection we can say has been given to the public servant. Protection at the time of investigation, protection at the time of cognizance, or the protection against the prosecution also. The double protection has been given. This runs counter to the the law laid down by the Honorable Supreme Court. So these are the aspects which should take into consideration while understanding the scope and effect of the amendments. I think now anything what you want to ask.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Sir, thank you so much, sir. Now there is an interactive session.
Yes.
I would request the participants to confine to the subject alone, because various participants want to travel beyond the subject and they are eager to ask some questions with regard to a different subject. Please confine your questions only to the subject alone.
Yes.
That is my request.
Sir, now the first person will be our former Advocate General of Tamil Nadu, sir, Mr. R. Vidudalai. Sir, I've sent a request for you to unmute yourself.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
So I've got one question to ask. I mean, in fact, I'm at a loss to understand. How do we synchronize section 17A and section 19?
Yes.
But for the word, in the discharge of his official duty. Section 17 says, prior approval is required even for investigation or inquiry with regard to an act done in the discharge of his official duty.
Yes.
Whereas section 19 is wide enough. So section 6A, which is Supreme Court considered in the Subramania Swamy case, did not have this phrase in the discharge of his official duties.
Yes.
Therefore, I'm really at a loss to understand where was the necessity to incorporate section 17A into the amendment when section 19 could amply take care of the person against whom an allegation is made. How do you take it? How do you synchronize this section?
No, that exactly I explained first itself. It is an overreaching the law.
I agree.
It cannot stand the test of law because of the law laid down in Subramanian's case, where the court has said an investigation is the object of the investigation to discover the truth. No one can impede this investigation. But here, to protect the investigating officer, and it is practically also it is not possible. See, you are approaching the superior officer whether to register the case or not. What is the material he has got to say no? At that stage, what we are having is only an allegations. Nothing, no evidence. It is layman's language, that is in our local language, say, because the cat has done we compare the dog. Dog is no better. It also steals the milk and drinks. So it is just like that. You go to a superior officer. The Constitution bench in Lalita Kumari says when a cognizable offense is made out from the allegations, you have no other option than to register the FIR. Here, the law says you run to a superior officer and he decides. On what basis you can decide? That's why I said it cannot stand the test of law. First, the law is laid down by the Honorable Supreme Court. It has to be, of course, the matter is pending before the Honorable Supreme Court, I am told. I think it will be considered in the light of that decision. Otherwise, there is no rationale at all. No rationale, practically it is not possible at all.
Sir, one more question, I am done. Yes. One more question. Perhaps you have not tested. See, now that there is an extension of the time up to 4 years.
Yes.
As per the amendment, section 4.4.
Yes.
Under the amendment, originally it was 2 years, extendable every 6 months. Now it is extended to 4 years.
4 years. Yes.
It is extendable up to 4 years. Where was the necessity for such a provision to extend the length of the adjudication? As a judge, how do you perceive it?
See, that is all this putting a time limit. We know that even the time limit was put by the legislature in a civil proceedings where the written statement has to be filed within 90 days. The courts themselves have extended it for genuine reasons. So we can't say that they have at least a time limit has been prescribed. I think it is good. At least a time limit has been. See, generally the position of a law is that in a criminal proceedings you cannot prescribe a time limit because there are the gravity of the offences. For example, there are some cases trial which cannot be concluded, but still when there's a time limit is there, it puts the court also in guard, and it is, I think that is a welcome step. Only thing is that even if they had reduced, I think the courts would have taken a lenient view that only thing he has to record the reasons, and that is a justifiable. Under those circumstances, I think some time could be given. I think requests come to the court very often. We cannot complete the trial, we extend it. And there are time limits in POCSO Act. How far it is adhered? Yes, it is the same position. It is putting a time limit. Is a legislature wants that within a time frame, it is at least puts the officer, one who is dealing with the case, on notice. That's all.
One last question. Whether the
Yes.
act has prevented corruption? Our
No, that
perception
is
is no.
With this to what an extent, that's what I said, because I can't express it. Only things that I posed a question to you to consider it, because you can express more boldly.
Yes.
Otherwise, why double protection? And protection
Right,
at the
right.
time of initiation. And
That would go. That should go.
omission of section 13(1)(d). I think if a public office, if you see the volume of the cases that has been found, I think big chunk is arising out of the abuse of the office. Now, if a person by his office, if he floats the funds, if he misuses the funds, and there is nothing which under which law you have to strain the language of the maybe section 13(1)(a), misappropriation. If you find earlier, the law was that by abuse of the power, not only you get the benefit, even the other side get the benefit. Especially the bank frauds. I do not under where it has to put the object. Though that is why I said first itself there was no clamor for the amendments. The purpose of the object. That's why I said with the setting I just touched it.
Yes.
The setting of this, the proposal was mooted because to bring it in line with the international convention. Whether international convention wants it to dilute the law?
No, no. It's never wanted.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yes.
So next we have Advocate Shankaran from Coimbatore. Shankaran, sir.
Yeah. Very, very good evening, Lordship.
Good evening.
This is my question, my Lord, regarding cases pending under the 1988 PC Act.
Yes.
And on the question of sanction under Section 19.
Yes.
My Lord, your Lordship would definitely know Narayanaswamy was the state of Karnataka.
Yes.
Where it was held that at the time of commission of offence, the
Yes.
public servant was holding one particular position. But at the time of filing the final report, he
Yes.
had been promoted, and therefore sanction was not necessary.
Yes.
My Lord, I just wanted to know Lordship's take on that. Whether does it not make Section 19 itself absolutely redundant, if that is going to be the interpretation of law?
See, this law has been made to circumvent the law laid down by the courts. What is the effect of it? Can say right or wrong, now the law is there. Unless it is challenged, and challenged on the ground that it runs contrary to the settled principle of law, or it does not effectuate the purpose for which it has been made, I think then the court has to take a call. Now, right or wrong, there is law. Unless it is challenged, we have to go by that.
My Lord, I'm on Section 19 of the old Act, where
Yes.
public servant has not been categorized at all. It
Yes.
simply says public servant. It doesn't say at the time of commission of the offence one particular post, at the time of filing of the charge sheet another post. That's the reason why this question, my Lord.
No. Now the idea, see, why the sanction is required. What is the purpose of sanction? I think the sanction is always connected with an offence is
Exactly.
connected
With the office.
is
Yes.
relatable to the
Yes.
office.
Yes.
So under section 197 also, the law requires if any offence is committed in the discharge of his duty,
Officially.
it is the
Yeah.
office which gives him an opportunity to commit this offence. So therefore, there is a safeguard has to be provided to the accused that before he is prosecuted, his department or his superiors finds out
Yeah.
whether in the discharge he has faulted in the discharge of his duty or not. I think that is to safeguard the interest of the, that is a genuine safeguard. That is why the sanction procedure was there right from 1947.
Yes, my lord.
Yes, so it is.
Narayanasamy was the state of Karnataka defeats that safeguard. That's my, and it defeats section 9.
That's why I said for you, for the present, that 1970 says that whatever sanction, whatever the position of law that was existing, it continues.
Yeah.
So therefore 1970, if you read, but the first decision what I said,
Good.
I think that will come to your help to take a decision how to proceed.
Obliged, my lord. Thank you.
Yes.
Sir, next we have a senior counsel from Madras High Court, sir, Mr. A.R.L. Sundaresan.
Yes.
Sir, I've sent a request for you.
Yes.
A.R.L. sir, I've sent.
Good evening, my lord. We are really happy to have your lordship giving a wonderful lecture.
Yes, sir.
Only one thing which I thought maybe I am wrong in putting this question, because corruption is corruption. Getting gratification, illegal gratification, whether it is small or it is big, it is the same.
Yes.
It has got to be weeded out.
Yes.
But then, as counsels, when we argue cases, when I find that a VAO in a Tahsildar's office for taking 200 rupees, he suffers 2 years sentence, he suffers dismissal from service, we find that there should be some discretion given to the court in awarding sentence, and there should not be minimum sentence. What is your lordship's view on that?
No, see, now the one of the main change that was brought into this act in 1988 is to enhance the sentence. The makes the stringent offense, the stringent provisions were made. It should act as a deterrent. And how the punishment has to be, see, generally in the IPC also, the is discretion has been given to the court. Here, if you see section 16, I think there's some parameters also are the matters to be taken into in fixing the fine. In fixing the fine, at least some parameters are there. So compared to the other general law, this position is better. And regarding the quantum of punishment, I think it is the discretion is left to the court. I think that so many factors that go into while sentencing. It is not that one or two, there may be there's so many factors, as you know, the mitigating factors or aggravating factors, whatever it may be. We consider the overall circumstances of the case and then sentence it. It is not based on that a village accountant, the offense that he has committed, maybe he might have been caught red-handed while receiving 500. But if there is a material to show, or at least the court comes to the conclusion, though maybe based on the evidence or not, it is 500 from one person. And every day if this is an offense. So you can imagine the quantum. Yes. The magnitude of, not the quantum, the magnitude of the offense. Yes.
So next we have Rajashekaran Ramakrishnan. Rajashekaran Ramakrishnan, I have sent a request for you to unmute yourself. Yes.
Good evening, my lord. I am Rajashekaran, final year law student, Government Law College, Coimbatore. You have been my role model. You have been inspiring us, a lot of youngsters. And I would like to ask a question on the topic itself, and not left or right from the topic, straight central to the topic. Since the topic is prevention of corruption, the parties will be highly powerful people like politicians, bureaucrats, government servants, etc. So I would like to ask Lordship, how Lordship will prepare himself before delivering a judgment, since the people are powerful. I hope I stick to the topic.
I do have a doubt whether it is after the topic.
It is not to the topic, but since you asked, see, judges, when they decide, don't bother about the person, the personality. It is only the cause before us, the evidence before us, nothing beyond it. So whether he is a politician, whether he is, such consideration should not go into at all.
Yeah, sure.
And if they go into it, he is not fit to be called a judge.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I'm just asking you.
They're not connected to that, but since you are a law student, and if you aspire to be a judge, I think you keep in mind we never identify ourselves, the judges, with the cause or with the person or the personalities. If the
Thank you so much.
moment we do it, that judgment will be biased and perverse also.
Of course.
Yes.
Equality before law. Much obliged, Your Honor. Much.
Yes.
Good evening, Lordship. It was a nice
Yes, good.
lecture. We were all benefited by that. But I
Yes,
have a
sir.
basic doubt on the 17A.
Yes.
My view is 17A, as
Yes.
in any statutory provision, Lordship will find a protection against action taken in good faith. Under the
Yes.
civil liability,
Yes.
nobody can sue the government servant. That kind of a protection is given.
Yeah.
If I am right, under the Subramania Swami's case, it was a comparison of Article 14 to the selection of joint secretaries and above.
Huh?
If I am right. Now they have extended to all public servants, if I am right. In the light of that, in the light of that view, just because we give a protection against civil liabilities, the government might be otherwise. No government servant will take a decision, fearing action. Then
Yes.
the government machinery cannot run. What is your view on that, Milo?
That is why, see, if in discharge of his duty, if he takes a decision, so that is why it says it qualifies, where the alleged offense is relatable to any recommendation made or the decision taken.
Yes. So it's a
Now,
very
for
restrictive provision.
for example, there is a request to denotify the land. Now the material or the allegations are that this land, the notification or the acquisition has been completed years back, decades back. And the note has been put up by the bureaucrats or by the officials that this land cannot be denotified. Still, the public servant denotifies it. So here, the allegations is pertain to the decision taken by him. So then section 17A says, that is why I said it is not applicable to or relatable to all the offences where the allegations relatable to recommendations made or the decision taken. Then the protection is given to him at the stage of cognizance, a sanctioning authority, not cognizance. After the completion of the investigation, sanctioning authority finds out whether the allegations made are false, whether the decision taken by him is in discharge of the act, and it decides. But at the stage of investigation, see, when allegations, that's why in Lalitha's case, when the allegations prima facie make out a cognizable offense, it has to be investigated. You have to register the FIR. And that is what in this one, the decision, Dr. What I told you, the earlier decision, 2014, it says that nothing should impede, that the investigation cannot. Investigation, what you do, your right or not to interfere. Though by registering the FIR, of course, the court says that your liberties are interfered. To that extent, we can say it is impeached. But when there are allegations, it has to be investigated. Without allegation, no one can give you a clean sheet or an exonerate. By investigation, you can't just brush aside these allegations. So that is what has been laid down in the decision.
Now the question is whether Prevention of Corruption Act has to be enforced or it should be by way of a departmental inquiry. Because ultimately motive is required to prosecute anybody under this act or even investigate against a person. So that has to be, some differentiation has to be drawn there. My view.
If you understand this, what is the object that could be achieved by insisting for the permission of the superiors? What is the object sought to be achieved? What is the object of this act? Object of the act?
Knowing whether he has discharged it correctly or not.
Yeah, that's all. So, that it be investigated. At the threshold itself, you can't cut short. So therefore, it is against the main object itself. That's what my view. Of course, the court has to consider it. Yes.
And Lordship decided to refer to 2020 judgment. That was Justice Bhanuvadi's judgment, right?
Maybe I'm not very sure who is the Author of it is just extracted in another decision. May not be Justice Bhanumati's.
Because some Allahabad IAS officer fought a case before Supreme
Yes.
Court saying that he has retired and he should not have been prosecuted.
May not be. It may not be a full.
Anyway, I will not trouble
Other
Lordship.
honorable judge. Yeah, yes. You just again.
Thank you very much.
Yes, I think that 2020 Supreme Court, I think is a very good decision where it is very affirmatively they have to, that all these Ayyappa's case and all other things they have discussed. And that matter is already pending before the larger bench also. Yes.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Yes.
We have got Mahavir Shivaji on the line now.
Good evening, Lord.
Yes.
Good evening, Lord. Lord,
Yes. Good.
I am Mahavir Shivaji from Madras High Court, Lord.
Yes.
Lord, while prosecuting the public servant,
Yes.
and it is the prosecution is the left with the hands of the court,
Yes.
what necessitated the sanction required from the executive wing? Is it acting as a limitation over the court's activity, or is it a judicial interference? And what is the purpose of sanctioning, getting a sanction?
Sanction purpose of sanction is to protect the public servant from frivolous allegations, from harassment. I told you, see, it is very easy to fix a public servant in a person to the office, ask for the
even
change of
after
kata.
1 second.
Now, yes. Yes.
That we have to go with the prosecution, continue to try the matter. And what is there? What is harassment? Is there? Nothing is there.
No,
After getting a sanction.
No, but your question is, what is the necessity, requirement of getting a sanction? Is that your question, or see what is the necessity of the prosecution? I've already explained it.
Yes,
I already explained it. I think. Yes.
Oh, thank you, my lord.
Yes. Yes. Any other
We have
question?
got, we've got one G. Indra, advocate.
Some disturbance.
Yes,
Some
please,
disturbance, echoing, and
yeah, please
others have to
unmute.
mute their mic.
Indra, I've sent you a request. You unmute your mic. I've sent you a request. Unmute your mic, Indra. I've sent you a request. You unmute your mic. Yes.
Yes, someone is raising hand then. Yes.
Yes,
It's Indra here.
actually, I wanted to ask you about subsection 4 of Amendment Act. I got the answer now. The whole question now. Hello.
Yes.
Yes. Now, the Amendment Act 2018 is boosted for the corrupt or honest persons.
What is that? What is it?
Amendment Act 2018 is boosted for the correct or honest.
That is why I can't give you a straight answer. You can give express opinions, but I think by here I just explained to you the circumstances by which you can infer. You can infer that is what. That is why my endeavor is only to place you the facts, the law, and the position. What was the position till yesterday, and what is the legal position today? That I already explained it. You can judge when section 13(1)(d) is omitted, and that is the major chunk of the litigation pending in the court. And when at the investigation stage itself you insist on the sanction or the approval, and you want to preempt the entire remedy, or at least you prolong it for 4 months. Or in a case when the private person is there, you ask the private persons to go and convince the sanctioning authority. And even before the sanctioning authority in such a case, it says the right of audience is given to the accused. It is nowhere in the entire criminal procedure you would find that a right of audience is given to the accused until the charge sheet is filed. It is he has to speak only before the court, except under disproportionate assets, where after completing the investigation, he has been asked to explain. Because the section itself says when he fails to explain. See, that is the stage. And if he fails to explain, then in the court also he can explain. That's a different thing. But here, while giving a sanction, if you see that section 19, when then private party, he goes for sanction, then section 19 subsection, he shall be provided that the appropriate government and competent shall give him a right of hearing. Central government for the purpose sanction. When a private party was provided that in the case of request from the person other than the police officer or an officer of an investigating agency, the appropriate government or the competent authority shall not accord sanction to prosecute a public servant without providing an opportunity of being heard to the concerned public servant. So after hearing only, it is not only double protection, at every stage it is a protection. So you can judge now whether what is the object, what is the purpose. Yes.
Sir,
Because
since we are on
sanctioning
the line
authority, yes, sanctioning authority has to give the sanction based on the evidence, not on the defense. He is not trying it. See, all these procedures run to the basic procedure or the procedure we had in a criminal court. Yes.
So since we are on the sanctioning part, just a bit out of that. Now, with respect to the sanction given by the governor of West Bengal, with respect to the arrest of the MLAs, now sitting MLAs, but former MPs, with the Narada String case, there is a big debate that the sanctioning authority of the governor was wrong. It should have been the speaker, and that the speaker ought to have. They should have waited for the speaker to be taking charge, and thereafter a sanction should have been obtained. I know it's a bit out of context, but
there is constitutional provision who has the right to see if a person, the public servant has been defined, and the sanction has to be given if he is a public servant under the government by the central government, if it is under the state by the state government, or by the person who is competent to remove him from the post. So the only, you see the constitutional provision, who can remove a MLA or the MP from the post. I think he is the authority that has to be, because test is laid down. Test is laid down under the act. So that will be the, so under whether this governor or who has to, just see the constitution provision. Yes. Now, for example, a member of the UPSC, member of an UPSC. Now, because he is posted in a state, if the governor gives here, you have to see the constitutional provision, who is the appointing authority, who is the appointing authority competent to remove him. See the constitutional provisions, and that will give an answer. Yes.
With regard to the question asked my friends, the Calcutta High Court has given the stay order of the bail granted to the MLAs. What is the opinion on this?
All the sub judice.
No, I didn't want to go into it because it was all serious. I just wanted to go only with respect to the sanctioning authority. Okay,
yes.
So we've got one last person. I think it's VP Sarathi, advocate. Sarathi, sir, I've just sent you a request. Can you unmute your mic and go ahead, because we are, yes.
Just to thank Lord about the very informative session and for the organizers. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sir, coming to sum up, sir, it was really an enlightening one, sir. You have enlightened all of us with respect to the Amendment Act of 2018. In spite of the heavy schedule, you have just taken more than 1.5 hours to be with us. And thank you very much, sir. On to Mr. J. Ravindran.
Sir, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, thank you. See you.